A nasty old nurse, Miss Dyer. Her work was paid for at the Old Bailey. In the old days we would have lit a big bonfire and roasted this wicked old witch perfectly.
World history has seen many brutal infanticides. However, the case of this woman has become one of the most resonant. The incredible cynicism of her crimes, as well as the unimaginably high number of victims, amazes even those who, it would seem, have seen everything in this world. She will go down in history as the cannibal from Reading, whose case shocked the whole of England. Young and pretty Evelina Mormon made a mistake in choosing a man. As soon as he found out that his girlfriend got pregnant, he disappeared. Single girls with children in Victorian England were, to put it mildly, judgmental. A Mormon could lose her job, and therefore her livelihood. Evelyn didn't have much choice, and she decided to put her daughter in good hands. The girl hoped that she would be able to place her baby Doris in a prosperous family that would take care of her. In addition, the Mormon firmly believed that after a while, she would be able to get out of poverty and take her daughter back. In one of the newspapers, the girl saw an ad in which an elderly couple was looking for a child. Mrs. Harding pointed out that she and her husband have a nice house with a garden and a stable financial situation. They asked for a one-time payment of £10 for the child. Mormon contacted Harding. During the correspondence, Evelina was finally convinced that her child would be in safe hands. In addition, Harding assured the young mother that she could visit her daughter at any time. On the appointed day, the women met. Evelina gave Harding the baby, a box of baby clothes and money. They said a warm goodbye, agreeing to visit Mormon in the very near future. Only Evelina was not destined to see her daughter, because Mrs. Harding was the cynical mistress of the so-called baby farm. And this woman was not going to engage in overexposure of other people's children. And anyway, Mrs. Harding is not the real name of the mistress of the conveyor of death. Her name was Amelia Dyer, who would later be nicknamed the Cannibal of Reading. When she got to her home in London, the woman first took out a white ribbon and strangled baby Doris. The proceeds of £10 went to pay for housing. The scheme worked once again. Literally the next day, little Harry Simmons turned into an angel. Amelia put the children's bodies in a suitcase, crushing them with bricks. It remained to do the menial work, get rid of the evidence. With a heavy burden, the woman reached the coversham locks and threw the suitcase into the water. He immediately went to the bottom. Only this time she was unlucky. A man noticed Dyer. But Amelia did not attach any importance to this fact. She was sure of her impunity. Unlike many criminals of her generation, Dyer was not formally a child of poverty. She was the youngest of 5 children. She had 3 brothers and a sister. She was born in the small village of Pavel Marsh, east of Bristol, in the family of a wealthy shoemaker. She learned to read and write, and loved literature and poetry since childhood. However, her formerly happy childhood was overshadowed by her mother's mental illness, which was the result of typhus. Amelia witnessed her mother's bouts of insanity, and was forced to take care of her until she died, being already insane in 1848th year. Later, researchers will note the psychological impact that these events had on Amelia. And also the fact that due to this circumstance, Amelia has learned a lot about the peculiarities of the behavior of a person who loses his mind due to illness. After the death of her mother, Amelia lived with her aunt in Bristol for some time, after which she was apprenticed to a corset manufacturer. Her father died in 1989. The elder brother Thomas inherited the family shoe repair business in 1861 year at the age of 24. Amelia began to live permanently separately and moved into an apartment in Bristol. There she married George Thomas, who was 35 years older than her. George was 59 years old. And both of them lied about their age at the time of marriage in order to reduce this difference. George subtracted 11 years from his age, and Amelia added 6 years to herself. Many sources later accepted this age of hers as a valid fact, resulting in a lot of confusion. For several years after her marriage to George Thomas, Amelia trained as a nurse. Such work was exhausting in the Victorian era, but it was considered as a respectable occupation, and also allowed to acquire useful abilities. Having established a business relationship with midwife Helen Dane, Amelia learned how to earn money easily. With the help of her own home, where she provided shelter for young women who became pregnant out of wedlock, and then took the babies for temporary care with a view to future adoption by other people or let them die of hunger and malnutrition. Helen Dane had to leave for the United States shortly after meeting Amelia in order to avoid attention from the authorities. Mothers who were not married in Victorian England often tried to find at least some income by any means. Since the amendment to the Poor Law of 1834 year abolished all financial responsibility on the part of fathers and illegitimate children, thereby forcing the society to take care of these children, which considered single parents and illegitimate children as something that deserves only contempt. All this led to the emergence of the practice of so-called baby farming, in which baby farmers acted as a kind of agents for future adoption or foster care, receiving regular payments or a one-time advance payment from infant mothers for this. Many offices were also created that sheltered such young women and took care of them until they gave birth. Mothers subsequently left their unwanted children under the supervision of these so-called pediatric nurses. The predicament of the parents involved was often used for financial gain. If the child had wealthy parents who just wanted to keep the secret about the fact of birth, the lump sum payment could be about £80. The sum of £50 could be negotiated if the father of the child wanted to hush up his involvement in the fact of birth. Nevertheless, in most cases, such future young mothers, whose immorality even excluded the possibility of their acceptance into workhouses at that time, were very poor. Of such women, approximately £5 were charged. Unscrupulous guardians often sought to starve the children entrusted to them for a while, to save money for their upkeep or even intentionally hasten their death. Noisy or attention-demanding infants could be sedated with readily available alcohol or opiates. The infusion of the year frescordial, colloquially known as mother's friend, a syrup containing opium, was a popular choice for such a case, but there were several other similar drugs. Many children have died as a result of such questionable practices. Opium has killed many more babies due to starvation than directly due to overdose. Dr. Greenhow, who conducted the investigation for the Privy Council, noted that such children were in a state of constant drug intoxication and thus did not experience hunger, and it was difficult to feed them. The result was death from severe malnutrition. But coroners most often recorded weakness from birth or lack of breast milk or simply hunger as the cause of death. Mothers who decided to return or simply check the health status of their children could often face difficulties. But some of them were simply too scared or ashamed to report any suspicion of a crime to the police. Even the police authorities often had problems trying to trace the tracks of children who were reported missing. At first, the idea of earning Helen was not very impressed with Amelia. But when her husband died in 1869 year, she needed an additional source of income, and she decided to open her own shelter. At first, Amelia faithfully managed the orphanage. She earned a good reputation for herself and even remarried in order to have the image of a noble family woman who is not afraid to give the child into care. In her second marriage, Mrs. Dyer gave birth to 2 daughters, with whom, however, she did not have a relationship. And a little later, Amelia left the family, completely devoting herself to her shelter. After a while, the woman realized that there was not enough money received from the parents of abandoned children. And then she remembered Ellen Dane's story. At first, Amelia simply forgot to feed the baby in time or give him water. She left children on the street and in other ways sought the death of a child without resorting to direct physical influence. The high mortality rate on her children's farm soon aroused the interest of the police. And in 1879th year, she was sentenced to 6 months of hard labor after serving her sentence. Amelia returned to her former activities, but now she has changed her handwriting. The owner of the shelter no longer staged accidents, but used open physical influence to get rid of another ward. Later, the criminal either hid the bodies or invited the coroner to draw up a death certificate. Amelia has voluntarily become a patient of psychiatric hospitals several times, due to her alleged mental instability and suicidal tendencies. This always coincided with periods when it was profitable for her to disappear. As a former nurse in a mental hospital, Amelia knew how to behave in order to ensure a relatively decent existence. As a patient of such an institution, Dyer appears to have started abusing alcohol and opium-based drugs at the beginning of her murders. Her mental instability could be related to the abuse of these substances. In 1890, Dyer took on temporary maintenance of the governess's legitimate child. When she returned to see the child, the governess immediately suspected something and undressed the child to see if he had a mole on one of his thighs. She wasn't there, and the scandal, coupled with long-term suspicions on the part of the authorities, led to the fact that Dyer either really went crazy or faked her insanity. She drank 2 bottles of opium tincture one after the other, thus making a serious suicide attempt. But her body, due to long-term drug use, has developed immunity to opium-based products. Therefore, the woman survived. In 1893, Dyer was discharged after her last stay at the Welsh Psychiatric Hospital. Unlike previous breakdowns, this was the most unpleasant experience in her life, and she was never accepted for treatment in a similar hospital. 2 years later, yes, I moved to Corsham, Berkshire, accompanied by an unsuspecting assistant, Grandma Jane Smith, whom Amelia hired after a short interview at the workhouse, and his daughter and son-in-law Mary, and known as Polly and Arthur Palmer. A move to Kensington Road, Berkshire, followed later that year. Amelia convinced Jane Smith to call herself her mother in front of unsuspecting women giving up their children. It was an attempt to create the appearance that they are a caring mother and daughter. However, everything changed in March 1896 year. Then the crew of the barge, sailing along the river, noticed a small bundle in the water and lifted it on board. After unwrapping the find, people were really horrified. Inside was the body of a baby, who was later identified as Helen Fry, a girl whose mother had given her to a temporary shelter a few days earlier. After the body was discovered, the policeman began an investigation, carefully examining the cloth in which the corpse was wrapped. One of the representatives of the police department found a piece of label with the name of Mrs. Thomas and her address on it. And this discovery was decisive in the case. This finding was enough to start the search for Dyer by the police. But they still could not find convincing evidence of Dyer's direct connection with the commission of a serious crime. Additional evidence was obtained from witnesses and Bristol police, who forced them to increase their vigilance. The researchers took Dyer's house under surveillance. Investigators have suggested that Dyer may flee if they suspect that he is under surveillance. The police decided to use the young woman as bait, hoping that she would be able to arrange a meeting with Dyer to discuss the provision of her services. This option was possible to be taken by detectives in order to make sure that Dyer was really engaged in baby farming, or simply gave them an excuse to arrest her. It turned out that Dyer was expecting her new bait client, but instead found detectives waiting for her on the doorstep. On the 3rd of April, on Good Friday, the police raided her house. The police officers were apparently struck by the stench of decomposed human flesh, although they did not find human remains. There was, however, a lot of other evidence related to the murders. This includes white framing tape, telegrams concerning arrangements for temporary adoption, pawn tickets for children's clothing, receipts for advertising, and letters from mothers asking about the health of their children. According to police estimates, over the previous few months, at least 20 children had been placed in temporary care by Mrs. Thomas, who, as it now turned out, was Amelia Dyer. It also turned out that she was going to move again, this time to Somerset. This number of murders led to a number of estimates that Mrs. Dyer could have killed more than 400 babies and children over the decades, making her one of the most mass murderers in history, as well as the most mass-known female killer. Amelia Dyer was arrested on April 4th and charged with murder. Her son-in-law Arthur Palmer was charged as an accomplice. During April, the bottom of the Thames was explored, resulting in the discovery of 6 more bodies, including Doris Mormon and Harry Simmons, the last victims of Dyer. Each child was strangled with a white ribbon, which she later told the police was, as you might say, something of mine. 11 days after the transfer of her daughter Dyer, Evelina Mormon, whose name was found on the things stored by Dyer, identified the remains of her daughter. When investigating the circumstances of the murders in early May, no evidence was found that Mary and or Arthur Palmer acted as accomplices to Dyer. Arthur Palmer was released as a result of a confession written by Amelia Dyer. In the Reading prison, she wrote the following with a lot of spelling and punctuation errors.
Sir, please do me the favor of informing the judges on Saturday the 18th that I have made this statement, because I probably won't have that opportunity. And I have to lighten my mind, and I know and I feel that my days are numbered on this earth. But I feel it's a terrible thing to involve innocent people in trouble. I know that I will have to answer to my heavenly Creator for the terrible crimes that I have committed. But may God Almighty be my judge in heaven and on earth. Not my daughter, Mary Ann Palmer, not her husband Alfred Ernest Palmer. As I solemnly declare, none of them was in any way connected with all of this. They never knew that I was plotting to do this great evil until it was too late. I'm telling the truth, and nothing but the truth. I hope I will be forgiven. Only I and I alone must stand before my heavenly Creator to give an answer for all the evil created by my hands. Amelia Dyer, on the 6th of May, 1896. Amelia Dyer pleaded guilty to 1 murder at the Old Bailey trial.
Doris Mormon. Her family and acquaintances testified at her trial that they were growing suspicious and worried about her activities. And it turned out that Dyer had narrowly escaped detection several times. The testimony of a man who saw and spoke to Dyer as she carried a valise with 2 bodies to the Caversham locks also turned out to be important. Her daughter gave vivid testimony that convinced the court of Amelia Dyer's guilt. The only defense for Dyer would be to declare her insane. Before that, she had twice sought admission to psychiatric hospitals in Bristol. However, the prosecution successfully proved that her apparent mental instability was a ploy to avoid suspicion. Both cases, as it was found out, coincided with periods when Dyer suspected that her crimes could be solved. It took the jury only 4.5 minutes to find her guilty. During the 3 weeks she spent on death row, she filled 5 notebooks with her last, true and only confession. The night before her execution, a chaplain visited her and asked if she wanted to confess anything. She handed him her notebooks, asking, "Isn't that enough?" As a result of the curiosity, she was summoned to court to appear as a witness at a hearing on charges of participating in the murders of her daughter Polly, which was scheduled for the day coming a week after Dyer's execution. In this regard, it was recognized that Amelia was already legally dead from the moment of the verdict, so her testimony cannot be presented. Thus, her execution was not postponed. On the eve of her execution, Amelia learned that the charges against Polly had been dropped. Amelia Dyer was hanged by James Billington at Newgate Prison on Wednesday. On the 10th of June, 1896, at 9 o'clock in the morning. When asked on the scaffold if she has anything to say, "I have nothing to say." Despite the fact that the court found the owner of the shelter guilty of only one crime. After her death, the policeman managed to prove a whole lot of murders committed by her during her bloody activities. According to modern experts, there were more than 400 of them. However, the story of the cannibal from Reading did not end there. A few years after the execution of Amelia Dyer, a barely alive baby was found in one of the London trains, sent to the care of a certain Miss Stewart, who, having taken the money, abandoned the child. After carefully examining the circumstances of the case, the policeman found out that the daughter of the executed child killer Mary M., also known as Polly, was hiding under an assumed name. However, the woman managed to escape and avoid the fate of her mother. This high-profile case has left a deep imprint on the history of England. After the events of those years, the authorities adopted a number of laws designed to regulate the activities of children's farms, which, however, did not help the unfortunate orphans to find a safe haven. Unscrupulous shelter owners continued to follow in the footsteps of the most brutal killer, pursuing their own selfish goals. And the women, frightened by the pressure of society and their own helplessness, were forced to give their own children to children's farms, despite the risk never to see them again.